Rob Hutton from Bloomberg. Just a couple of points of detail. On raising the bottom tax threshold to 10,000, at the moment, anyone earning £9,000 with children would be receiving tax credits. Are you proposing that when you bring the tax threshold up, that those tax credits are recalibrated and effectively...
No, they're not recalibrated. They remain as they are. The proposals we have for child tax credits involve tapering at the top, so that people getting over, say, 50,000 no longer get child tax credits. The tapering is at the top end. There's no change at the bottom.
And on the mansion tax, it strikes me that it's very difficult to put a value on a house that's about £2 million. I mean, there's quite a few in your constituency. If a Liberal Democrat government announced a £2 million mansion tax and I had a £2 million house, I'd be inclined to argue that it was now worth less than that because of the large tax that was attached to it. How is it going to be adjudicated?
Well, the valuation agency specialises in valuing property. That's what they're there for. And there are similar arrangements, in fact, much more broadly based systems of property tax in many other countries, notably the United States, where those kind of judgments are made on a continuing basis. That isn't a problem. Yep.
David Hughes, PA. You've identified 17 billion of revenue to pay for these measures. But with the deficit running at the best part of 170 billion, how is this not a bribe in election year? And also, on the green taxation, are these airline measures a revenue-raising measure, or are they designed to encourage behavioural change? Because if it's just a revenue-raising measure, isn't it the same problem you've had with other forms of green taxation, that they're not designed to actually achieve green ends?
Well, taking those 2 points. Firstly, as I said earlier, we think there is an intimate link between the difficult decisions ahead in terms of cutting back public spending and filling the structural deficit and fairness in taxation. If we're going to ask millions of people to accept very serious cuts in public spending in order to deal with the structural deficit, it seems to me there has to be a down payment for them. And if, in addition, we're not going to do anything to make taxes fair, to make taxes work for them, to provide a tax break to millions of people on low and middle incomes who are finding it very difficult to get ahead, then I think you're asking too much of people. So it's a kind of deal, if you like. We're being open with people, and we'll provide more detail. Vince and I will provide more detail of this later in the week on our plans to start dealing with the structural deficit, and more details on our plans to identify £15 billion worth of cuts and savings. But that goes hand in hand with what we're talking about this morning, which is at the same time we will make sure the tax system works for you. I think that's the most intelligent approach towards trying to bring people along with us in the coming years when we're going to have to deal with some very difficult decisions. On the aviation, on shifting from a per passenger duty to a per plane duty, yes, it will raise £3.25 billion under our plans. But of course, we hope that it will change behaviour. So it, for instance, creates an economic incentive for airlines to fill their planes with passengers. I don't want to see empty aeroplanes flying from one place to another when it's not necessary to do so.
But then, obviously, if that's the case, that will reduce the revenue that comes from those measures.
No, because it's a per passenger. Because it's a per plane levy. That's precisely if it leads to more fuller planes, and if it leads to a fairer reflection of the environmental damage caused by freight, which is being transported by aeroplanes, that seems to me to be all well and good.
The previous experience of environmental taxes and the climate change levies, as an example, is that you raise revenue and you change behaviour at the same time. Getting into a big technical argument about price elasticity of demand, but you can do both, and that was what would happen.
Okay, last one. Yep.
Simon Mayers from the ITV Regions. What you've proposed so far has been fiscally neutral. You've taken with one hand and given back with the other.
Yeah.
Yet it's against the backdrop of the deficit, and you've talked about the £15 billion worth of savings. Can I ask you what you're going to do about possibly increasing taxes in terms of, are you talking about keeping the 20 pence basic rate? Are you going to increase the top rate? And what are you doing about thresholds? Because if you're shifting the starting rate of tax to 10,000, you've got a pretty narrow 20% band now. We're
not proposing to change the bands. Just on the point about the link between our tax plans and the dealing with the structural deficit, we have one new tax and only one new tax in our plans to generate revenue to start filling the structural deficit, and that is a 10% levy on the profits of banks. We think for the period during which the banks are dependent on the taxpayers for their survival, and during the period in which the banks are unreformed, as you may know, we want to split up the banks, a sort of modern version of Glass-Steagall between high-risk investment banking and low-risk retail banking. We think during that transitional period, there should be a 10% levy on banks. Other than that, all of our plans currently as they stand, of course this will need to evolve over time, but currently as they stand is to identify money to deal with the structural deficit from cuts in government spending. Thanks very, very much. Thank you, everybody.